I'm Robin Bevan. I am your elected national president and I am a serving head teacher in a secondary school in Essex. And because of that experience that I have day in, day out, I was in school today, along with our key worker children and those who were more vulnerable and need our support. Because of that experience, I'm able to reflect the views that so many of you have, the experiences you have and have been having over the many recent weeks. If you've joined the call tonight, the chances are that you are one of thousands of our members. You may work in a whole variety of different contexts and settings and roles, but thank you for joining the call. You're with us because you are one of 450,000 dedicated professionals who is a member of the National Education Union. I'm going to provide an introduction and then I'll be handing over to the familiar faces of Mary Boosted and Kevin Courtney. But I want, by way of introduction, just to take you through a few reflections, a few quick reflections. I want you to imagine last September, just imagine this for a moment. If last September, the Secretary of State for Education had stood up and said, you know, I really want exams to go ahead, but I'm not sure if it's going to be possible. So I'm going to work with the profession to draw up a plan B, have an alternative ready so that everybody knows what it is in case we need it. Just imagine if that had happened. Imagine if in October, the Secretary of State had turned around and said, I can see that making schools COVID secure is particularly challenging in special school contexts. So I think we really need to do something about the number of pupils attending those schools every day and the support that we need for those members of staff. Imagine if in November, the Secretary of State had turned around and when the national lockdown was announced, he'd said, well, excuse me, Prime Minister, if you don't include schools and colleges, then you're going to be mixing 10 million people every day in the overcrowded classrooms of our schools. And imagine if in December, when the Secretary of State saw the rising number of cases in our schools, the rising number of positives affecting both pupils and staff, imagine if he'd said, we really need to introduce a public health testing system for our staff, and access to public health screening for our students. And we'll have that ready for you early in the new year. And imagine if he'd also said in December, because of the rising case numbers in schools, I think it would be really sensible if for the first 2 weeks of the spring term, all schools moved to remote learning, just so that we can see what's going on. That may all seem a little bit fanciful, but for all of you who are on the call who are NEU members, what you need to understand is that every single one of the things I just suggested was a policy of the National Education Union that was provided as advice to the Department for Education and which have been systematically ignored, overlooked or sidelined through a headlong rush into the situation that we now find ourselves in. And so that sets the context for today's meeting. We find ourselves in a situation we should never have been in, which now, as a union, we need to find our way out of for our members. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Mary Boosted, Kevin Courtney, your joint General Secretaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's my turn to go first. And good evening, colleagues. It's really great to be with you again. And there are a huge number of people on this call. Thank you very much for giving up your time. Some of you will have been on our members' Zoom on Sunday. You might not know, but there were a huge number of people on that Zoom call. We know at least 40,000 members were on that call. 100,000 people were there for the whole hour of it. And 400,000 people saw at least part of it while it was going on. Many others have seen it on Facebook since. So we've reached a significant proportion of our members and of the public. Those people were all hugely concerned about the pandemic and the government's poor decision-making and the inaction to produce education, the inaction to protect families and education staff. That was on Sunday with all of that concern. What a difference a day makes. Last night at 8 p.m, Boris Johnson announced that primary and secondary schools would be closing except for vulnerable children and the children of key workers. Now, it's really important to say, we don't celebrate those decisions. This isn't what we want. This isn't what we look for. We want safe schools. And those decisions were made far too late. It was obvious before the end of last term that closing schools would be necessary to control the virus. It was obvious when SAGE said to the government on December the 22nd that schools would have to close if the R rate was to be below 1. They even said that with schools closed, the R rate might still not go below 1 with this new variant. So it is disgraceful that these decisions were made so late and putting us through all of the angst and the anxiety that we had and that you had. Now, currently, special schools, early years settings and alternative provision will stay open. We're going to say more about that on this call, and we are working urgently with others, and we'll say more about that on this call as well. But we want to start by congratulating all of you. It is never easy to stand up and be counted, especially in some of the school settings that we've got. It's always challenging. It takes nerve and it takes courage, but you did it. You stood up for your own safety, for your pupils and their families' safety, and for your community's safety. By saying to your head teachers, many of whom supported your stance, to tell them that it was unsafe to be in school teaching full classes, in crowded buildings, with no social distancing, no PPE, and inadequate ventilation. You agreed with our advice that it was not safe for primary schools to be open at the height of the pandemic, and that schools should move to remote working, but that you would be available to work online with key worker and vulnerable children in schools. None of us would ever want schools to be closed in normal circumstances. You work as teachers and leaders and support staff because you are dedicated to our pupils and students. We know how important education is as a means for them to achieve their potential in life. To us, that is our noble ideal. It is your living, working, everyday reality.
But this is not a zero-sum game. And when the pandemic spirals out of control, as COVID has spiraled out of control, then it becomes reckless to open schools and to put over 10 million children and adults into crowded buildings with no social distancing, poor ventilation and inadequate cleaning. Boris Johnson admitted in his address to the nation last night that schools had become vectors for the transmission of COVID. Had he been paying attention, he would have realised that before Christmas. Thousands of you spent letters to your head teachers, either singly or signed individually on a group letter. And your union, the NEU, and the NEU reps worked tirelessly to communicate with their members in their schools and to support them during this hugely challenging time. And we want to say this: reps, school reps are the backbone of the NEU. You're our spine. You are the NEU in your schools, standing up for your members and your pupils, fighting for a better education system and showing every day that collectively, together, we can do so much more than we can do alone. So we want to thank the members, and we want to thank in particular reps for supporting members in all that you've done. And you have made a difference, a huge difference. Throughout the day yesterday, we were being bombarded with messages by members, by reps and by NEU lay officers about what was happening around the country. More and more schools moved to remote learning as head teachers supported their staff colleagues, agreeing it was not safe to leave schools open with a full pupil intake at the height of this pandemic. And then we started getting reports from councils and local authorities from across the political divide: Labour councils, Conservative councils, councils with no political majority. And they were supporting the NEU position and either shutting all primary schools or giving support to head teachers to use their professional judgment on whether schools could be kept open with the level of infection in their area and the levels of pupil and staff absence. So the reports kept coming in from Cumbria, whose head of public health was overruled by Sunday by Gavin Williamson when they said they wanted schools to be closed because the hospitals in Cumbria were in danger of becoming overwhelmed with COVID patients. And so the news came in from Essex and Newcastle, from Lancaster and Norfolk, from County Durham and from Bristol, from Lancashire and Yorkshire, from all over the country, that primary schools were closing and that councils were defying Gavin Williamson and doing what was right for their local NHS, protecting their local hospitals when he wouldn't.
So when you were in school yesterday or out of school yesterday, it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control for the government. A key moment in the afternoon was when Jeremy Hunt, ex-Secretary of State for Education, for Health and Chair of the Commons Health Committee, called for a complete lockdown, including schools, because the virus is out of control. The government, he said, had to act hard and fast. And at 8 p.m, Boris Johnson spoke to the nation. He told us that our hospitals are under more pressure from COVID than at any time in the pandemic, and that everyone would be to stay at home for the next 7 weeks at least, that schools and colleges would be closed until half term for all except key worker and vulnerable children, and that university students would not be allowed to return to their colleges until the middle of next month at the earliest. Now the set of statements about primary and secondary schools resolves our immediate national concern over safety in those settings. Once again, we want to congratulate those members who sent those letters in. We really do believe that your actions helped the government to come to the right position. Our concerns are not yet resolved in nursery or early years settings or in special needs settings. And we are engaged in urgent discussions with NAHT and other unions about the right definition of vulnerable in special and AP settings and about the right level of provision in early years settings. There is a need for some nuance because settings vary so much, but we certainly don't believe that every child with an EHCP plan is properly regarded as vulnerable in this context. Our discussions with these other unions are ongoing, but being taken forward with urgency. And what we are saying is, while our discussions with others are ongoing, if you have specific concerns in your setting, we believe that the best way of seeking to resolve them now is through direct contact with the union, through your branch secretary, who will have the support of our regional offices, rather than through the use of Section 44 letters. This will ensure that we can give the best advice appropriate to the situation and to look for solutions. If there are additional concerns about safety in primary or secondary schools, then again, contact with the rep and the branch is the right way forward. We will be working with others on additional advice around updating of risk assessments in the light of the new variant, and we're working on that urgently.
As you know, despite the government's actions yesterday, the situation in the country remains dire. In a joint statement, the UK's 4 chief medical officers said, "We are not confident that the NHS can handle a further sustained rise in cases. And without further action, there is material risk for the NHS in several areas being overwhelmed in the next 21 days. That is what forced Boris Johnson to make the announcement he made yesterday at 8 o'clock. The infection rate in the UK per 100,000 is now greater than the infection rate per 100,000 in the USA. And John Edmonds, an epidemiologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, said it was now baked in that the UK would see a death toll from COVID which would exceed 100,000. Unfortunately, none of this has been new to the NEU. We have been following the science. We have been looking at the graphs of rising infections. We have been saying that fully open schools, when the second wave with the new variant, which is so much more infective, was reckless to education staff and to communities. Because although children do not get ill, hugely, overwhelmingly, children will not get ill with the virus, they pass it on very effectively to their families and through them to their communities. We have been telling the government these truths for some time, but as ever, it took Boris Johnson forever to acknowledge what was staring him in the face. And the same, I'm afraid, can be said of Gavin Williamson. It beggars belief that yesterday, Gavin Williamson sent over 3 million children back to school for one day, causing huge stress and anxiety to our members, to parents, and to the community. Yesterday, Boris Johnson also told the nation that GCSE and A-level classes would be cancelled. Cancelled now, in January, with 5 months to go to when the exams would have been taken. This is irresponsible. This is reckless. How ridiculous has Gavin Williamson's repeated insistence that exams will be taken next summer? How ridiculous that insistence, not guided by science, not guided by any practical thoughts. How ridiculous it now appears. We are now being asked by government ministers to help them come up with alternatives to GCSEs and A-levels. We did actually do that months ago. All the unions and the National Governors Association joined together and sent ministers a paper, a detailed paper on how GCSEs and A-levels should be conducted this year. We said that if exams were to go ahead, there had to be fewer papers, and if exams were to go ahead, all the topics on the syllabus had to be questions on the paper, so that students could be tested on what they'd been taught, not tested on what they hadn't been taught through no fault of their own. And we said, if the exams, what we have to do, we wrote this paper in September, you have to plan that exams might not be able to take place. And if they don't, you need a plan B. And we talked about coursework. We talked about exam boards setting the same coursework across all the schools. So there was a common piece of work on which to be able to assess pupils. We talked about topic work. We talked about students doing some work in exam conditions, so that teachers would have a common base of evidence on which to build their teacher assessed grades and then centre assessed grades. The government did none of this. Gavin Williamson just carried on, and Nick Gibb just carried on saying, the exams will take place, the exams will take place. And really now we know that they are not likely to take place. And can we really be any more confident that last year's fiasco, with Boris Johnson saying that the algorithm was, very good and very robust, and then the next week saying the algorithm was mutant, can we be any more confident that there won't be the same fiasco next year? Now, we will work hard with the government because we owe it to our year 11 and year 13 pupils to do the best for them. We are the professionals. We have the best ideas about how to take the situation forward from here. The government has said they'll work with us. We will do that in good faith, but let's see where we go.
We think it's even more alarming for primary members because Nick Gibb admitted today that he doesn't know whether the Key Stage 2 SATs will take place in the summer. He doesn't know, really. I mean, if you didn't laugh, you'd cry about this. We are absolutely clear. The Key Stage 2 tests should not go ahead. And it would resolve stresses now for year 6 students, for year 6 parents, and for year 6 teachers. If that statement was made, we demand that the government is clear now. The Key Stage 2 SATs will not go ahead, and we will be campaigning to ensure that is the outcome. We will work with the DFE to try to get them out of the hole they've dug for themselves. That's the right thing to do. Our people's futures depend on it, because we are the education professionals, and your union, working with you, us collectively, we're the people that can solve these problems. I want to return to the situation facing members in special schools, in alternative provision and early years settings. As we said, we're working urgently with other unions, but we do want to give some initial advice now. Special schools should only be open to children of critical workers, where neither parent is able to work from home, to those who are at safeguarding risk from remaining at home, and any pupils who, after individual risk assessment, the school deem it more beneficial to be in a school for at least some of the time, e.g. mental health, access to therapies, living in an environment with little space. It's important to keep the numbers in school as low as possible to reduce transmission of the virus. We are working with other unions on this, on advice around this. Only the staff needed to support the pupils in school should be on site. All other staff should work from home. Special schools should get in touch, as we said earlier, with their branches, who can then get in touch with their regions if they think there are too many pupils in a school so that it is unsafe. CEV staff in special schools have the same protections as those in other schools. They should definitely be working at home. All staff working in special schools should request an individual risk assessment, which has to take account of the new variant of the virus. We will be issuing further guidance, aiming to work with the other unions to get a joint approach as soon as we can. Matt Hancock, Secretary of State for Health, said that early years centres would remain open because most were privately run institutions, and if they were not open, they would go out of business. Quite what that justification has to do with health and safety, we do not know. We will be looking to issue further advice for the early years sectors and maintain nursery sector urgently, again with others. Alternative provision centres, PRUs, will remain open. We think that has to be right. It's highly unlikely that the children and young people in alternative provision will be able to cope with extended lockdown, or at least for many of them. But we do think that all alternative provision needs to be COVID secure. That might mean employing more staff, in particular supply teachers, as well as support workers, to facilitate social distancing and better ventilation.
We'll be working with you, our members, to advise you on key professional issues which absolutely now come to the fore. We know that you are acutely concerned about supporting your pupils throughout lockdown, keeping them in touch with you, with education, and with providing remote learning online and remote. We have got some guidance on remote learning, on online learning on the NEU website, but we are working at pace to get more guidance up to support you. And actually, we want to hear from you about what you are doing to support your pupils and how you are communicating with them. We want you to tell us what you're doing, because so much of what you do will be such good practice. We want to hear from you about the resources that you're finding invaluable, that you couldn't do without. They really make a difference. We will be running professional development courses on remote teaching, on learning and on assessment, and we will advertise these to all members. So do keep an eye out for your emails from the union. We absolutely want to support all our members so that they can do the best professional job, so that they can teach their pupils in different ways, and so that when this awful pandemic is over, your pupils can come back into school with confidence that they have not lost out too much, with confidence that they can achieve, and looking forward to continuing their learning journey with you in their schools. We know that you'll be really concerned about disadvantaged and vulnerable children and young people. DfE guidance has changed to say that pupils who cannot work from at home because there's no space or for other reasons, or who can't access lessons online, should be in school throughout the lockdown. And we think this is right, but we're also saying that it's simply not acceptable that now in 2021, there are children and young people who don't have access to the internet at home, who don't have learning devices at home, because this isn't just an issue for lockdown, this is an issue for their lives. We rely on the internet, we rely on being able to access information and entertainment on the internet through electronic devices so much now. And this should not be something which is just available to those children whose parents can afford it. It should be available to all children. So we're saying we do think it's right that if children can't learn from home, that they are in school, but we also think it's right that they all have access to IT devices. And of course, saying that children who can't learn at home should be at school does not mean that those schools should not be COVID secure, because we do know also that because of the social stratification in our school intakes, there will be many schools where there will be more pupils who can't learn from home. They cannot be at the same time COVID insecure. And if that happens, we will be making representations to government about what we're going to do about this. And this takes us back to the 10th of June, when we wrote to Boris Johnson with our education recovery plan. And a key point in that was you had to make school sites larger so there can be social distancing, so the viral transmission doesn't happen in schools. If only he'd listened. We will be issuing further guidance to members about how they can keep themselves safe in the pandemic, whether working from home or in school. Kevin and I wanted to finish our talk with you tonight by saying these are awful times. COVID is a terrible disease. For some on this call, it will have touched your lives in awful ways. And we are very sorry for that. But together, we can work to support one another. We can work to ensure the best education for our pupils in a time of crisis. We can act collectively to ensure that we are safe, our communities are safe, and we can collaborate together and work together to save the NHS, because we are the National Education Union. We are strong and we are together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you, Kevin. And we're now going to move into a time when I'm going to be collating, with the help of the technical team, questions on various themes and issues that are coming through. Clearly, anybody who looks at the list of questions would see that we've got far more than we can possibly answer, but what we're trying to do is tease out questions that get to some core themes. Just before I take the first set of questions, I think it's worth saying, as you listen to what Mary and Kevin have put forward, that it's quite obvious that Department for Education instructions and guidance so often misses out important sectors of our education provision. As a union, we have members who work as support staff, as teachers, as leaders, in the independent sector, in the maintained sector, in schools, in colleges, in early years, in special schools, in residential schools. They work as supply teachers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and we seek to ensure that we always include all of you in our considerations and policies. And the first set of questions that we've got are about a group of staff who I think quite rightly feel that they've been overlooked in the decision making across the last couple of days. So Beth Gattrell, thank you for your question, Beth. Thank you very much. I work for a maintained nursery school and I want to know why we are being so neglected. Over a third of my staff were positive for COVID in the last week of term, and this is what they've come back to. Tui Clery, thank you for your question. Early year practitioners have not been included in the closure of primary, secondary and colleges. What's the NEU's stance and what advice do you have for NEU members in early year settings who have submitted a section 44? And Suzanne Hopkins, thank you too. I work in a maintained nursery school, which hasn't been included in the school closures. We have very many very anxious and frightened staff who are also feeling undervalued and angry. Because we're funded differently to other schools, if we have fewer children attending, we lose huge amounts of money and may become unsustainable in a very short period of time, a matter of weeks. So what's the NEU planning to do to support early years settings? So Mary, Kevin, either of you wish to respond to that set of three questions and the issues that they raise?
Shall I go first? And then Mary, we might add more later, but we share these concerns. We saw today that Callum Semple, I think I've got that name right, a member of the government's SAGE advisory panel, said that the decision to keep early years settings open was political rather than based on the science. So we do share the concerns, and the point that Beth makes of a third of the staff testing positive is something that we want to take forward. So I said earlier, we're engaged in urgent discussions with NAHT, with Unison, with other unions. We intend to write to government tomorrow on this question. We will be doing urgent work on it, but our general position is that early years settings should be treated the same as primary settings. Key worker and vulnerable children are what need to be there. We think it's important at this stage to try and get a joint position together with the other unions, to get that to government, to take the case to them, and to be simultaneously working on advice that we can give more robustly towards the end of this week or the beginning of next week. There are reasons why that's the right approach for us to take at this point. So we want you to look out for further advice from us. We want feedback on how many children are actually turning up at the moment, and we want to press the case to government that they are ignoring the science around what's happening in early years settings. And we'll say more later this week or early next.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And the next set of 3 questions are very practical questions arising from the context in which we now find ourselves. So Tim Owen doesn't say whether it's secondary or primary, but he is fairly clear that my school is demanding teaching staff continue to travel to work in order to deliver remote learning from our classrooms instead of doing this from our homes. This doesn't sit right with me. Do I have any options? So as I say, really practical question. We know this issue has come up in a number of schools. It shouldn't have done, but it has. Okay, we've got a question from Steve Pickett. And this is about those who over the weekend may have put in Section 44 letters, having downloaded them from our website and gone through that process. Steve says, can my head teacher request separate signed Section 44 letters by all staff to put on our personnel files? There's kind of an issue about what that position is. And Andy Berryman, will there be any guidance on what the limits and concerns we may have for supporting groups of KVW? Okay, so Andy's clearly working in a school. They've done the right thing. They've got their key worker children, vulnerable children on site. But clearly he's got concerns about distancing, conditions, masks in classes, given the context of the new variant, and the issues that arises in particular around group size. So we've got 3 different questions, but Mary, perhaps you're happy to kind of respond to the issues that they raise.
Yes, I will. I'll give it a first go, and I'm sure Kevin, well, I know Kevin will add to anything I say, or if he feels I've missed something out. So Tim, we're hearing this a lot, that their head teacher is saying you've got to come into school to do remote learning. We don't think that's reasonable. There's no reason. If you can do remote learning successfully from home, then it's much better you stay at home. The Prime Minister said, the government said, we're in a lockdown, stay at home unless you have to travel for work. But if there is an alternative, you should stay at home. If that's an issue, then we advise you to get in touch with the other NEU members in your school and raise it with your head teacher. And if you don't get a response and the feeling is sufficiently strong, then we can take that forward in terms of a ballot of the members in order to work from home, a ballot for action. So you do have some options. First of all, get together with the other members in the school. If you've got a rep in the school, and make the representation to your head teacher about why you are going to be working from home, why that is better, not only for you, but better for society, better for the country, because you're not traveling, you're staying at home, but you're doing your work. And if you don't get anywhere with that, then get in touch with your branch in order to take those representations forward. Usually, if people get together, if members get together and make representations, then it's often the way that you can make changes in your school. But if not, you have a branch and you have a district to support you. Steve, can my head teacher request separate signed Section 44 letters by all staff to put on our personnel files? Why would the head teacher be doing that? It's simply an intimidatory move. So just don't respond. Just don't, nobody respond. They can request it, but you don't have to answer their request. And you certainly don't have to sign a separate letter. And you certainly don't have to go to the head teacher. Just, the best answer to that is just no answer. Just pretend it hasn't happened. And then Andy's saying, will there be any guidance on the limits and concerns we have supporting clinical key workers and vulnerable children? And because the numbers have grown. We are very aware of this. We do know there are more children in school. We will be putting guidance out about groups of these children. It's difficult for us to say, you can only have this many children in a bubble. That's difficult to say because schools are different, settings are different, the situation is different. But what we can say is that with the new variant in the pandemic, and because it's so much more transmissive, it is even more, and because the government has declared that there is a lockdown, and because they've limited attendance at school because they want schools to stop being vectors of transmission for COVID, then the old risk assessments don't apply. We need to have new risk assessments with smaller groups of pupils where you really can get social distancing and when members of staff can remain socially distanced. So all those things now become an absolute priority, that there can be social distancing in schools between pupils and between pupils and staff. Because if that doesn't happen, schools will remain centres of transmission. So again, if you're a rep in your school, go to your head, do the risk assessment again in the light of the new variant, and make sure new procedures are put in place, and that we don't have classes full of key worker children and vulnerable children, which actually are not going to enable COVID to be suppressed in that school. That's really important. And again, we will be coming out with further guidance about that.
Thank you very much, Mary. And as you know, a serving head teacher
I think
here.
Kevin just wanted to come in quickly.
Thank you
Sorry,
very much.
Robin.
You know, that's good, Kevin.
Right. I just wanted to say on the working from school, some members might want to work from school. Some members might be in a situation where it's actually extremely difficult for them to work from home. So we don't have a position that you shouldn't be in school. But there is the general government guidance, work from home if you can, and we would rely on that. We think this is an example where you couldn't use Section 44 to say that you are at immediate danger because you have to go to school. You might be able to drive there. Public transport might not be an issue. So it's not an S44 issue, but it would be a collective issue. If members in your school feel strongly about it, they believe the head teacher's being unreasonable about it, even if some of them want to work at school, but they think that other people shouldn't have to, it is an issue that we can take up industrially in the normal ways that trade unions take these things up. And we will be supporting people doing that. We've got a couple of cases already that we are supporting. And I just wanted to say, it's not really on the key worker and vulnerable, but it's just a way of crowbarring. It is about that. It's a way of crowbarring something in. If these group sizes are too big, we want to throw the country's attention back to the 10-point plan that we put forward on the 10th of June. Some of it is now a little out of date because it was about free school meals, and Marcus Rashford, with maybe a bit of assistance from us, has moved the debate on that. And there's also a bit about summer holiday working, so a bit out of date. But we said on the 10th of June that the government should be seeking to get more people into mobilizing all supply teachers and seeking to get others back into the profession, people who've recently left, in order that we could find more spaces to teach and we could reduce class sizes. Because we were making the point that the infection rate was harder to open schools last summer in the UK than it was in Denmark, partly that was because Denmark's class sizes are so much lower than ours. So we were making the point, if you want schools to be open safely, find more staff, mobilize them, bring them in, get smaller class sizes. Now, I think a lot of people thought that was far too ambitious, the idea that our government should find extra staff and extra spaces. It would have required some effort. But I think if you look back at it now, if they had done that, then cases would have been far lower in all of our schools. The rate of transmission of the virus would be lower in our society, and it would have been a good investment. And we are going to go back to pressing the case for that. If they do want to get schools open again after February half term or the middle of March or whatever date they come up with, then that one of the easiest ways they could make that safe would be to invest now in finding more staff so that we could run with smaller groups, and they should start doing that now. So Mary said this in the answer earlier. If we've got bigger groups, or in what we said earlier, we want more staff, mobilize the supply staff, get all the supply staff into schools now or working online now so that we can have smaller group sizes.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Full and very helpful answers from both Kevin and Mary. And I think, to be honest, if you're looking at a class and it's not half to a third the size of normal, then probably something's not right. Depends on context, but pretty good instinct there as you're looking at it. And we've also got a set of questions from colleagues predominantly in the post-16 sector who are particularly concerned about the decisions that are being made around BTEC examinations, applied generals, and other exams that are going on right at the moment. So I'm just going to take two of those questions. Denise Plant. Denise, thank you so much for your question. I teach BTEC students. I'm concerned that my college plans to open to allow these exams to be taken. I don't think this is right for my community. I also think it's creating a disparity between A-level students and BTEC students. And Jason Y, January BTECs, do you endorse the fact that they're being sat over the next 2 weeks as usual? So I think it looks like Mary coming in first on that one. Thank you, Mary.
So our position on this is a bit fluid at the moment, but we are working on it. I was asked the question just out of the blue on the BBC this morning, and I said I thought it was going to be very hard for students who have been preparing for BTEC and vocational exams and expecting to take them this week to have the exams cancelled this week. And I think that's true. I think that is very, very hard. Our other thoughts were that there may be an opportunity to take those exams in social, well, you know, exam conditions. They're sitting in desks, they're sitting apart. You could have them in more rooms, and that would be a more controlled situation. Then we got information about how large these exams are and how many students would be in confined spaces in exam halls. And of course, these are older students. And I think now the Association of Colleges and other organisations are saying that BTECs, you know, it won't be possible to take them. So again, what we're going to be doing is working with the Association of Colleges, working with the other bodies to see what advice we can give about exams. We don't have the power to cancel them. We don't have the power to do that. But what we do have the ability to do is understand the situation better. We're having a meeting tomorrow about that, and we'll be issuing guidance for members. It's a really tricky situation, this. It's really, really hard, because the teachers who have been preparing students for BTECs and for vocational exams, you know, there's a sort of rhythm. Students have been working really hard over the Christmas period. It all leads up, your teaching and your assessment, to the exam. The exams are due to happen this week, and now we've got schools and colleges closed. So it is a very, very difficult situation, and we will see what announcements are made tomorrow about that. But we do understand members' concerns about large numbers of older students in confined spaces, and we will be working further on that to issue guidance to members.
Thank you, Mary. And of course, it will also be the case that this is critically dependent on the context in which those exams are being sat, the student numbers, the infection rate in that location, whether they've got sufficient capacity to accommodate the students' class space, which does make it a particularly challenging issue to give a kind of immediate and direct answer to. Also illustrates, I think, superbly the huge importance of the union working with the department to ensure that we're looking further down the road than they seem to have done, because it does appear as though this decision about closure was made without any recognition that these examinations were happening, without any regard to the fact that this was part of that life cycle of our post-16 institutions. And we've got a set of questions that take us into another aspect of the school community. John Myers, Ella Layton, and Joanne Giles have submitted questions, all of which are to do with special school contexts. So Kevin, I'll come to you with these. I'll just read them through for you. John Myers says that special education and indeed early years education are causing huge anxiety in his area. The local authority have allegedly told head teachers that they should have all members of staff in. Can the union emphasize strongly that we need low number of pupils and therefore reduce numbers of staff on those sites, low numbers being less risk? Ella's question, working in a special school, we've been told we're fully open to all pupils. What are the actual rules around this? As I'm slightly annoyed. Ella, you're entitled to be more than slightly annoyed. But Ella says she's slightly annoyed that if I worked in a mainstream school, I would now have the relative safety of working remotely. Joanne's question, I work in a special school for 2 through to 19-year-olds. I sent in my section 44 letter as I did not feel safe with the current situation. Joanne, along with everybody else who did that, thank you. You did the right thing. And Joanne goes on to say, I said I would only feel safe with small bubbles of pupils and staff with no mixing between the bubbles. This has now been put in place. That's good to hear. With 56 out of 90 given a place. I've been asked to teach a small group with stable staffing. However, the children come on transport, which then mixes the bubbles. I'm not sure that I feel safe with this. So you can see the tensions and issues arising in a school that seems to be trying to do the right thing. Kevin, perhaps you could give just some insights on John, Ella and Joanne's questions, please.
Thank you, Robin. And I said earlier on in our initial points that we are working closely and urgently with NAHT, with Unison, with ASCL on these questions. The government's initial attitude is all vulnerable children should be in school and anybody with an EHCP is vulnerable. Now, we don't think that is a sensible interpretation of vulnerable. It is difficult to be, special school settings are all very different to one another. So it's difficult to have a national simple categorization, but we do think, and this is what we're working on with the other unions, is that you can look at an EHCP plan, and from that you can make an assessment of whether that child's needs can be met at home. And we think if they can be met at home, then that's the right place for them, because the whole point of the COVID restrictions of this lockdown are that as much we minimize mixing as much as possible in order to get the virus levels down. So that very much goes to what John was saying. Our emphasis will be on trying to minimize the number of children and minimize the number of staff. We do understand, and we have said throughout the pandemic, that we support the idea of key worker children being in school and vulnerable children being in school. The children who could be, particularly damaged by being at home, we think they should be in. The children who need to be there so that their parents can do the Tesco deliveries for the rest of us, or be on the hospital wards for the rest of us. We think that it's right that they should be in school. But we don't think that just because there's an EHCP, that means that that child would be in that sort of situation at home. So we're working quickly, urgently with those other unions, seeking that advice. We'll be pressing government on it, but we'll come back to you, whatever government says on the attitude to that. It's interesting in these questions. So Ella says, what are the rules? And I think I've given the rules there that the government just hasn't thought through the rules and is just saying all EHCP are vulnerable. So that's their current interpretation. But in Joanne's question, it's clear that at her school, despite that happening, 56 out of 90 are in school, the others aren't in. And we're hearing that from lots of similar settings, special school settings, AP settings, where our members are reaching agreements at a local level of which children are in and which are out. Sometimes with a little bit of tussle between the union group and the MAT. I've been talking with someone today who's been through that, but where we're reaching agreement at that local level. So that's why we said in the call earlier on in what we're saying, if you've got this issue in your school now, we want you to talk about it in your school group and then bring it to your branch. We will be working with the other unions and looking to see if we can, we'll be coming back to you, having done that work with the other unions that will help all of those discussions at that local level.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we've now got a set of questions, and thank you to everybody who's contributed, because the questions that you're placing with us, even if we don't get to answer them, we do get the chance to see the concerns that you have, and we know they're authentic, we know they're real. And there's a set of questions that have arisen in consequence, really, Mary, of this incredibly rapid shift from being expected, certainly for primary colleagues in particular, to have been in school yesterday with their classes and then suddenly switching into remote. But of course, it's also true for secondary colleagues who may have thought they might have a brief period of remote teaching, but were certainly not expecting this extended period. So Chantal Lester says, quite simply, today we received the shock news that as of tomorrow, we have to be in school for the delivery of all our live streamed lessons. Our head expects us to live stream lessons, teach key worker students as per the normal timetable. We're required to be in our classroom, as well as delivering tutor time as well, 5 periods of teaching. Do we have a right to insist we stream lessons from home? We've addressed some of that, but my question, Mary, really from Chantal is what do you do in circumstances where the expectation from the leadership team is perhaps unrealistic or is not going to operate well for you? We've got a question from Will Crichton. Our school has switched to fully online lessons, but is asking staff to contact parents every time their child is absent or not completing work during the live lessons. Lots of concerns about the volume of work that's generating, having to chase up absences every day, on top of the workload of designing and delivering the live lessons and the marking. Some parents don't even have email addresses, so we're being asked to use our personal phones to contact parents at our own expense. The issue there is very obvious. And let's go to Jonathan Parsons. Our school is trying to move all remote learning into live broadcast lessons. What's the advice on this? Staff are expected to sit on their laptops for the whole of the school day following their usual timetables. And by the sound of it, Jonathan, so are the pupils as well. So Mary, a range of practical issues arising from the shift into remote learning.
What to be taken away from the pandemic is the number of times that you forget to unmute yourself, as I just did. And I think all these questions, I'll answer them all together, actually. I'll just say a few points which I think are absolutely key. The first is that it is a misconception to think that you can simply move from in-school teaching and learning to online learning for every lesson, and that will replace the in-school teaching and learning. I was asked last night on Newsnight last night by Emily Maitlis, could I guarantee that online learning would be as good as in-school teaching? And I said, no, I couldn't, because actually it's a completely different teaching and learning environment. And if you're going to do a really good online lesson, that takes hours and hours and hours longer than it takes to do a very good in-person lesson, because so much of what you do in person, you are feeding off the reaction from the pupils, understanding what they're learning, seeing their faces, knowing the children who aren't understanding it, asking another question, going quietly and giving them an explanation, going and looking at their work. And teaching is a very interactive experience. There are thousands of interactions every lesson. So it's simply not the case that you can simply go to online learning and replicate a classroom. And so I said to Emily, of course I can't guarantee that online learning will be the same. And I think that is the key issue that you have to raise with your head teacher. If there are unrealistic expectations, for example, that you'll simply sit at your laptop and you'll do every lesson as live streaming online learning, I don't think that's reasonable. If it's that you will be doing every lesson through online learning and then catching up with the kids who are missing, the pupils who are missing, then actually that's an admin task and that should be done by somebody else. You shouldn't, it's hard enough doing the online learning, but what we should be arguing for is a mix of delivery. Some of it online, some of it sending work home. But the other thing is we should be realistic about what pupils will do. Most pupils will not manage 5 hours a day online teaching. They just won't be able to manage it. They will be too much. It's exhausting doing it. So we have to have a realistic expectation. Now, the government has written some guidelines or some requirements for online teaching, but these are, undeliverable in many cases because many kids don't have online learning and there aren't the platforms for it available in school. So if you feel that the requirements or the expectations being placed upon you are unrealistic, then have a union meeting. If you've got a rep in the school, have a meeting, ask the rep to call a meeting. If not, have a union meeting. You might be able to get branch officers in, you should be able to get branch officers in, and make representations now to your head teacher. Make a record of how long you're spending working doing this. And go back to our website where we've got guidance on online learning, we've got guidance on distance learning, and take that to your head teacher, because there's detailed guidance there about what is acceptable, what is reasonable. And it can't be the case that there's an assumption by anyone that you can replicate every lesson in school by lessons online. It's not possible to do that. The Open University says it takes 100 hours of preparation to get 1 good hour of online learning. Now, we don't have 100 hours, but neither do we have unlimited time to be doing online streaming lessons all the time. It's not possible, and the pupils won't learn. They will get too tired. They will get bombarded. So go to our website, have a look at our guidance, but then go and have meetings in school and make representations to your head teacher. And, you know, and if you have difficulty, contact your branch and we can escalate those concerns. Workload has to be manageable, both in a lockdown and in normal times.
Thank you very much, Mary. And with the time ticking away, we're almost at our 6 o'clock deadline. We're going to close the questions there. I am going to invite Kevin and Mary just to say a few words of summary in a moment. But as I do, just a simple and straightforward reminder, your union is there for you. You have seen Richard Marshall posting in the chat a whole series of links to different documents that can help and advise you. Mary has just encouraged you to have meetings of fellow members in your workplaces, talk to your rep, find a rep, or agree to be a rep jointly with somebody else if you don't currently have one. And also talk with other schools, because very often it's possible to find a solution to your problem by being able to say, but at the school down the road, they've chosen to do it this way. And surely, very often, you'll find that that's something that can easily be adopted in your own workplace. So I'm going to come to Kevin first. Kevin, you are muted at the moment, so I do hope that you do remember to unmute as you just offer a few words of summary. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robin, and thank you to everybody who's been on this call. I want to tell you that the union has gained 16,000 new members over the weekend, and to just build on what Robin was saying, 300 new reps. And those reps are the beating heart, as Mary said, of the union. We know that all of the members of the union are really grateful to the reps they've got in their workplaces. And it's you reps and members together, the collective strength of the union. So if you are in a school where there isn't a rep, then think about volunteering. You can have more than one rep in a school, so find a friend to volunteer with. If you're in a school where there's one rep, think about volunteering to be the rep alongside them as well. I want to say to you that you should feel proud of yourselves, because you changed the country across the last weekend. We've heard that as late as yesterday afternoon, people were still saying in the DFE that primary schools were going to be open in the government's announcement. The fact that the government didn't do that, I think there's a huge contribution that was made by people who put in those letters. So you should be proud of yourselves. We have helped our country be safer by the actions that you individually took in doing that. We haven't resolved the concerns for the country, and we haven't resolved the concerns that we have for maintained nurseries, for private, voluntary and independent nurseries, for school-based nurseries, for special needs, for special schools, for alternative provision. And as we said, we are working urgently with other unions on those, and you should feel that you can come to your branch to talk about them, as well as discussing them directly with other members in your school. Your union is the collective of all of us, and we're there with you about these issues going forward, from now.
Thank you, Kevin. Mary.
Thank you, Robin. I just want to say that I think it's important now for members of the union to realise that they do have agency in their workplace. We have shown that absolutely over this weekend. If there are issues which you think are genuinely unfair or genuinely unworkable, or if they are workable, they are going to cause huge amounts of extra work, then you have the right to raise those issues in your school. You have a professional responsibility to do so. If you are in a situation where you think that will be difficult, you have the opportunity to discuss it with others and raise that collectively. All that's easier if you're in a school with a rep. And if you do become a rep, we will provide you with excellent training, which will enable you to do your work to improve education and improve your lives and other colleagues' lives, working lives in your school. For too long, in particular, teachers and support staff have not had a voice. They have been done to rather than done with, done to by the government, and in some schools done to by management. Other schools have been very collaboratively working together, and school leaders throughout this crisis have been fantastic. But the creeping authoritarianism from government has also crept into too many schools. This pandemic has loosened that. It has loosened the chain of authority from government through Ofsted to schools. And you have the opportunity to change your working lives, to get back some agency and to get back proper authority over your professional knowledge, concerns and issues. This is an opportunity to do that now. It's difficult, but you've been brave. So carry on being brave.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to everyone who has been on this call tonight. I became a member of a trade union to look after myself. I became a rep when I realized that I needed to help others in my workplace. And I continue to be an active member of the trade union movement because of its power to transform workplaces for all in them and for all they serve. Together, as the NEU, we are strong. Thank you all so very much indeed, and have a good evening and all the best for what lies ahead in your workplaces tomorrow.